Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is Miss V, and here you are with the history vibe. And today we are on 11.1 guided notes, the causes of imperialism. Let's get started. Here are your vocabulary words. These are the words that we're going to talk about a lot in this particular lesson. Please take the time now to jot those words down. All right. Imperialism, colonialism, protectorate, and sphere of influence. All right, so if you recall, back in the 14th and 15th century, there were a lot of European nations that were exploring. And they explored for a particular reason. And if you remember those reasons, GGG, the three G's, let me know right now. So if you said God, gold, and glory, you are absolutely right. That was the reasons why European nations were exploring. However, now that time has changed, now we're in the 1800s, the reason for European nations to venture out into other nations such as Africa and Asia was a different reason. And that reason was mainly in the Industrial Revolution, okay? That major movement, or that major way of going to industrial or manufacturing societies, that caused imperialism. Okay, and here's the reasons why they wanted to do imperialism, or European nations did imperialism. They exhausted many of their natural resources, their coal, their iron. They just used it up. Okay, so now they used up all of their stuff. They need to find somewhere else that has the same natural resources. So they are seeking other places to get those natural resources to continue their industrial capital revolution, right? Also, they need to seek out new markets in order to sell to these new products or these new goods that they've been marketing or manufacturing in their factories. Okay, so materials, raw materials, and new markets, right? And this is what the economic reasons are for imperialism. These raw materials, these natural resources that they need to find because they exhausted so much of theirs, and they need new markets in order to sell those products that they manufactured in the factories to. Okay, so that's your economic reasons for imperialism: new raw materials, new markets. All right, so Europeans, in order to make it seem that it's okay for them to venture into other areas that did not belong to them, okay, they had to come up with, or there was ideas or ideologies in which imperialism was justified, okay, or made it seem like it was okay to do, okay. And these are the three reasons. There's three C's: competition, Christianity, and civilization. Competition in this case is that European nations needed those raw materials and those new markets to sell their new resources, but they had to find those new resources. So they ventured off into Africa and Asia to get those new resources. But the competition here is where these European nations are scrambling for different natural resources, and the ones that are able to get it, they are going to become this superpower. And the more they become a superpower, they are seen as, the best, right? So there's this competition among the European nations to be the best and obtain as much raw materials and control as much as possible, right? Christianity, they wanted to convert souls, right? And during the slave trade and encomienda system and so forth, they tried to convert a lot of the enslaved Africans and the enslaved Native Americans into Christianity because they figured that their souls were lost and not of Christ. So if they converted them, then their souls would be saved. Also, civilization. And civilization in this case comes in to play with Darwin's evolutionary theory. And his theory was applied to societies or a social aspect. And European nations at this time, or Europeans, believed that there were certain ethnic groups, particularly Africans and Asians and Native Americans, right, those outside themselves, that were less likely to survive an industrial capitalist society, and that Europeans are more likely to survive an industrial capitalist society, and that's known as survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest was taken from Darwin's evolutionary theory, but Europeans, in their way of trying to navigate, and explore and conquer areas, they applied that survival of the fittest to social aspects of human life. Now, is this true? Absolutely not. There is no clear evidence that this social Darwinism theory is correct. None whatsoever. But this is what Europeans in a racist trope used in order to say that it was okay for them to come in and control and dominate and colonize areas in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Okay? Alright, so now that we know why Europeans were conquering various lands in the world, especially Latin America, Africa, and Asia, we need to know what forms that took in terms of how it was set up, especially in 19th century European imperialism. And those three ways were colonies, protectorates, and spheres of influence. So a colony we should know about already because we talked about it before. They have total control by a foreign power. And much of Latin America was like that until they fought for their independence, right? The colony has to obey the foreign laws. They are ruled by a foreign leader. They learn foreign ways. They speak the foreign language, etc., etc. Okay? In a protectorate is a bit different. They do have local rulers, and those local rulers are in charge. But the foreign power provides protection in exchange for that conquered territory or that conquered nation to give exclusive rights. Okay, so they give exclusive rights, and the European power now gives protection. Okay, and also the European power may even provide a blockade from any other nation trying to come in and gain trading rights. Okay, spheres of influence is also different, where the country itself is on their own. They have their own, they're sovereign, right? However, a foreign nation or European nation would come in and deal with local populations and gain trading rights in a certain area, not the entire country, but just a small area, and it's granted to them, and they don't have ownership of the entire country. Okay, they just have influence in that certain area, which is why it's called sphere of influence. Okay, so those are the three forms in which imperialism was shown throughout Africa, Asia, and in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, the big question, and you probably are asking yourself as well, how is it that a relatively small portion of Earth, Europe, is able to conquer such a large area of Earth and the largest continents on Earth? Well, there was three forces that were involved in European imperialism. And those three forces, as you see here, was the Berlin Conference in 1884, the Industrial Revolution, and the technological advances that happened during the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to take a look at that a little bit more. So the Berlin Conference, what was that? The Berlin Conference was done by Otto von Bismarck in Germany, Berlin, specifically the city of Berlin. And this conference is what started the scramble for Africa. And the purpose of this conference was to gather all the major European powers, such as France and Great Britain and Germany and Spain and Portugal and all of these European nations and Russia. And they are going to determine how they are going to divide the continent of Africa. And Belgium was there too. Sorry, I forgot Belgium. And they were going to divide the continent of Africa just like you would divide a pie, right? Or you would cut a slice of cake. And they're doing this for colonization, okay? They're figuring out who is going to get a slice or a piece of Africa to colonize. Keep in mind, in this particular conference, there was no African representative from any African nation that was present at the conference, nor were they invited to this conference, nor did any one of these European nations have permission by any African country and their government to allow them to come in and take over any of the African countries. None whatsoever. So, what does this tell you? And how do you feel about it? Tell me about that in Edpuzzle or in the comments. Alright, so again, this is the next force that enabled imperialism in Africa and Asia and Latin America, okay? Technological advances made the scramble for Africa and parts of Asia and in the Caribbean as well possible, right? The Maxim gun, which you see right here, which was invented in 1889, was used to dominate African armies. So they would come in, of course, because African armies didn't have as much technology. They had guns because they were trading those with the slave trade. But they did not have guns like this Maxim gun, which could fire multiple shots at a single round, which is much quicker than a firearm would, right? Also, the railroad. The railroad industry allowed for a quicker communication and quicker supplies to and from African countries and Europe, right? Also, quinine was invented, and quinine was founded to prevent diseases from mosquitoes such as malaria, right? They're able to heal now from these medicines that's going to allow them to venture into Africa even further, okay? And now this allows them to go into regions of Africa that they have never explored before and be able to get in and conquer and get control of places in Africa and take down African tribes and their nations. All right. So how did this affect Africa? And how did this affect Asia? Initially, the slave trade labor was used during the 15th and 16th century, and that brought a lot of wealth to European nations. However, European nations took a bigger interest during the 1800s because they needed those raw materials. Remember that Europe was losing their materials. Their raw natural materials was getting used up in these manufacturing or these factories. So now they have to go into Africa and take as much of the natural resources that they possibly can without compromise or without a single thought of what an African nation would be going through. So using their technology, their racist ideologies, and their industrial lust for these raw materials, they go in and then conquer Africa for decades. And this has detrimental effects to Africa politically, socially, and economically to this day. In Asia, slave labor was growing, slave labor was done. However, major European nations, they were also in search of new markets to sell their manufactured goods, in which they started conquering places like India. and they started setting up spheres of influence in Japan and China during the mid-19th century, the 1800s to the 1900s. Okay, so now they're setting up protectorates and spheres of influence so that they can claim their stake as a superpower in the world. But they did not count on places like Japan and China to also rise to power, and Japan is going to become a major superpower in the world as well. Okay, so let's talk about it. Let's apply it. You're going to use this particular political cartoon. It's an American cartoon, to analyze it. Okay, but you're going to use the device called TACOS, and TACOS stands for time, action, caption, objects, and summary. Answer these questions in your guided notes and in Edpuzzle, and we'll talk about it in class. But it's not over yet. Just wait a minute. But wait, did you see my M&Ms? How many did you find? And if you can tell me what the M&M stands for, because M&M in this particular lesson stands for something, tell me and you will win a special prize in my class. All right? And I will see you in the next lesson. Peace.